Good morning. We are so happy to be here with you on this Saturday. My name is Tracy Flores, and I'm an assistant professor at the University of Texas at Austin. And I'm here this morning with my dear friend and colleague, Dr. Sandra Osorio, an associate professor at Illinois State University. And we are here to have a conversation with you about work that is very important to our hearts, work that is very important to our communities and our families, and also work that's very, very personal. And so we are going to talk about the ways that we work alongside young readers and writers to continue to develop them as multilingual readers and writers. And we are also going to talk about the work that we do alongside our pre-service teachers in ESL and bilingual settings to prepare them to enter classrooms and embrace these practices that also open space for their readers and writers. And today our presentation is called Reading and Writing I Fly, Using Translingual Mentor Texts in K-12 Classrooms to Amplify Youth Voices. And so today in our presentation, we also tip our hats to writer, poet, and storyteller Juan Felipe Herrera and his book, Laughing Out Loud, I Fly.
A carcajadas yo vuelo por bien. Laughing out loud, I fly towards the good things.
And in his book, this book of poetry that's written in English and Spanish, he reminds us of the good things in our lives. He takes us back to his childhood and introduces us to the sights, the sounds, the smells of all the good things in his life, reminding us of the joy and love that is present in our lives. And so today we're going to think about this as we move toward creating classrooms in which our students can see themselves centered in the curriculum and in which we provide them opportunities to fly by using all of their linguistic resources and practices across reading, writing, and the school day. And his work also, I wanted to make sure I said this, also reminds us of the power of teachers. Teachers who truly see and hear the songs of their students and sing them back to them. And he is a testament to good teachers, caring teachers, loving teachers. And so before we get started with our conversation, we wanted to talk about how we come to this work. As I mentioned earlier, this work is very personal to both of us for similar but also different reasons. And so we wanted to share our positionalities, what drives us, and our heart for this work. And so I think a lot about young Tracy. I think about little Tracy and the teachers that I wish that I would have had growing up, the opportunities to learn about my history and culture that I wish I had growing up, and my mother's story. My mother, when she was younger, she was punished in school for speaking Spanish on the playground. And she and her friends, who also spoke many languages, would have to write on the board, "I will not speak Spanish." They would have to write it 100 times. And sometimes they even got spanked. And so she shared this story with me as I was growing up. And this really influenced her in her decision to not raise me and my sister speaking Spanish. Spanish was in our household, but it wasn't my first language, the language that I am most comfortable in. And so she did not want me to have that same shame that she had felt, or that pain that she continues to that manifests when she tells the story and when she thinks about that time and that racism that she endured. And so I've spent my adult life trying to reclaim my language for me and for her. And I'm working towards raising my daughter, Milagros, to also be bilingual and be proud of who she is and where she comes from and her history and these stories that are part of her journey and her identity. And so in my work as a classroom teacher and also as a teacher educator, a former teacher for 8 years, I really work towards ensuring that my students, even within an English only restrictive environment, ensuring that they had access to books that they could connect with, their experiences and their identities, and to reading and writing opportunities that allow them to draw upon all of who they were every single day. And as I became a teacher educator, I carried that with me. My goal is to work alongside teachers and support them in unpacking their assumptions of what it means to be a reader and writer, and also to heal themselves too, because some of my teachers share a similar language story as I do. And it's painful and it hurts, and it's something that comes up in unexpected ways and unexpected times for me and for them. And so I work towards supporting them in supporting their students, in drawing upon all of their resources in the classroom, even if they don't share the same ethnic or linguistic backgrounds, being that teacher who sees, who hears, and who loves their students through the ways that they embody these practices and these beliefs.
And when I think of how I come to this work, it also begins with my childhood. I'm a proud daughter of two Colombian immigrant parents. I was blessed enough to grow up in a household where Spanish was spoken, it was the home language, and having strong cultural ties. I even went to a bilingual preschool in the basement of my church. But when I transitioned from preschool to kindergarten is when I was met with this monolingual view that permeates our school districts even today. And so when my parents went to register me, they were told that if they spoke Spanish to me, they should stop because I was going to be confused. The district, administration, teachers had not even met me yet, but given that my parents spoke with quote unquote accent, they made assumptions about that I wasn't going to be good enough, that I wasn't going to know enough to be successful in school. Come to find out, when I actually went into the classroom, I was actually very highly prepared, so much so that I could skip to first grade if my parents so choose. So that bilingual preschool was actually, a blessing, was actually a good thing for myself. And then I also confronted that again when I moved from the city to the suburbs. So I went to the suburbs that didn't have ESL or bilingual. And so they didn't know what to do with me who spoke Spanish at home. And so they put me in speech for about 2 weeks, trying to figure out what I needed. And then come to find out, I didn't really need anything. I was just a multilingual child that spoke multiple languages, English as well as Spanish. It wasn't that I spoke one and not the other. It was just that I was multilingual and they didn't know what to do with that. And so that really is what pushed me to go and be a bilingual teacher for over 10 years in the classroom, and now work in higher education with pre-service teachers, really trying to support them, them trying to reconnect, as Tracy had mentioned, with their language, with the culture that many times is silenced in school, and then also supporting them in how they can work with their future students to really get that linguistic and cultural tie and feel that pride in that language. And then I also have 3 children that I'm trying to raise bilingually.
Thank you, Sandra. And as we were thinking about our time together with you, we also wanted to talk about the ways that we also talk to our teachers about our stories and share these stories with our teachers, and also invite them to do the same as that process of unlearning those things that we were told about us, to imagine new ways and to heal ourselves and those who came before us. And so in thinking about our positionalities, about the work, about the students who are sitting in front of us in classrooms and that we see each day on the screen currently, we think about the language, the culture, and identities of our students and ourselves, and how you cannot separate these things. And so we draw very heavily on the theories of Chicana feminist Gloria Anzaldúa, who wrote from her experiences living along the Texas and Mexico border, and how she was made to feel about her language and about who she was, or who people were telling her she wasn't. And so she writes, "So if you really want to hurt me, talk badly about my language. Ethnic identity is twin skin to linguistic identity. I am my language. Until I can take pride in my language, I cannot take pride in myself." And so in thinking about her theories and her words and her teachings and what she has left us with, thinking about how does this look in our classrooms? What does it mean to truly embrace our students, to create a curriculum where they see themselves, where they don't have to feel disconnected in the different spaces of their lives? And thinking about how harmful that is to our students if we ignore that, or just that's not what we're doing right now, or that's for home. And so we wanted to share this quote with you. to continue to ground our conversation today. And not just this quote, these theories, these lived experiences that are our theories.
So when we talk about creating this welcoming space in your classroom, in order for students to use their full linguistic repertoire, a lot of times you'll hear it discussed as translanguaging. So translanguaging is not only theorizes, but names that natural communicative practice of multilinguals. It also is pushing against and challenging those monolingual notions currently underlying policy, curriculum, and practice. So translanguaging is really about recognizing how multilingual students use their language for communication. It's pushing back against that old theory of a bilingual, multilingual child being two monolinguals as one. And instead, really recognizing that they have one linguistic system that they're constantly pulling at from at all times. And so it's not realistic for us. We see it still in schools today, that language separation. And so we see, for example, in a classroom, literacy will be in Spanish, but then science is English time. And so that's not how multilingual students work. They can't really shut off a particular language. And so we really have to push back against that so that we recognize all the knowledges the students have and recognize their repertoire so that they can bring their full selves into the classroom.
This makes me think about what you just shared about your story and about the teachers who, tried to figure out what to do with you. Like, these theories help us to have the language to talk about the brilliance of what our students are doing and the hybridity and the expansiveness of their vocabularies and their identities.
Definitely.
And so continuing to expand upon what Sandra just mentioned, where she was talking about translanguaging and the thinking about the writing teachers that I prepare. So I teach language methods courses. And in these courses, I work alongside the pre-service teachers to think about how they will enter their classrooms as teachers of writers, not writing teachers, teachers of writers. As they are already writers, how are we going to move them along? And we come to this work within a translingual approach. And so we talk a lot about the languages that our students bring with them to their classrooms. The many varieties are not a deficit. They are not something to fix. They are not something to remediate. We do not remediate people or languages. They are not a barrier to overcome. They are a resource for producing meaning and reading, writing, listening, and speaking. And as Sandra mentioned, they're not separate. It's not two languages. We shuttle in between. We draw upon what makes sense to us, how the message that we want to convey, what we're trying to communicate to our friends, our neighbors, our teachers, through our reading and writing. And so it's very, in working with our teachers, we talk about these things, we unpack their learning in school, how they were taught, because our histories run through us. And so we start to become part of this. And so we have to do a lot of unlearning, unpacking to relearn new ways of thinking about language in our students. And so we wanted to share some examples of the ways that we work alongside young writers, that we work alongside young readers, the ways we work with our pre-service teachers in ESL and bilingual settings to think about what does this look like in practice, and to work alongside them and coach them through this as well, and try things with them, allow them that space to try, because just like our young students, they also need that space to try and grow. And in the courses that I teach, and in thinking about working alongside writers, I'm going to share the work with my pre-service teachers, but also my work in Somos Ritos with young Latina writers. And so a lot of this is going to also be very fluid, because this is the same type of work I do across the spaces. And so I have pictures here of some mentor texts. And the mentor texts are the texts that we choose to teach a writing strategy, to teach the move that a writer is making, how they start their story, how they end their story, the way that they move us through, the way they bring us in, the way they keep us wanting more. And in this selection of mentor text, it's an intentional selection of mentor text. We think about the students who are sitting in front of us. And so in thinking about working with my students to draw upon and ground their teaching in a translingual approach, I talk with them about the text that they pick and the importance of reading the story, vetting the story, making sure you're not recreating deficit views or stereotypes of communities or people or cultures, and also thinking about what we might teach from these texts and the ways that the writers use language throughout, the way they weave in and out of English and Spanish or other languages. And so a lot of the texts that I introduce to my teachers, my pre-service teachers, have to do with community members who are making a difference, who are sharing our stories, our abuelitos, our nanas and our tatas, and the foundation they've laid for us and their fight that they've endured for us and with us, our dreams, because there's a lot of joy in our communities, and thinking always about the richness, because no community, as Eve Tuck reminds us, is damaged. And so I always want to ensure that we are thinking about this joy and the love that's present, this fight, this resistance. And then thinking also about powerful teachers and what does culturally relevant teaching look like in practice. And so we talk about different examples. I have different texts that we share that are also examples of translingual mentor texts. And then family memories. And then also about the love that is present throughout our history, throughout our communities, and in our families. And so we talk about also knowing that we're not alone in this work. So if they come to a text and they're unsure, ask someone. There's many resources on the internet. You have a community with you at your school.
Tracy, before you move on, what is something you do when it's about vetting? Like, I think vetting is something that's so important. A lot of times, since Latinx children's literature, there isn't that much out there. People are like, well, I just take what I have. What do you offer to pre-service teachers? What suggestions do you give them about how to start vetting that text so they're not perpetuating that deficit thinking?
Well, the first thing, I model a lot of texts and I talk about why I pick them and the purpose that they serve. But I also share with them like the Pura Belpré Award winners, which honor and celebrate positive depictions of our communities, of our culture. And I also share with them different Twitter hashtags and groups. And I don't want to just say they're hashtags because they're not, they're collectives. So humanizing stories or healing fictions, I always get that one wrong, and disrupt text are really good spaces and really good community to ask these questions in a space that's supportive. And Latinx and Kids Lit, because we want to ensure that we are not, like I said, causing unintentional harm. And people are more than happy to talk with you. And also your school librarian, they also can support you in that as well, or other teachers on your campus. Yeah, no, that's an important question. We do a lot around that, and why would this be good? Why would this be bad? How would you use this? How would you not use this? And ideas like that.
Thank you.
So, no, thank you. And so some examples of some texts that I have drawn upon in my work with pre-service teachers and with young writers. Recently, Evelyn Del Rey is Moving Away by Meg Medina just came out. And it's that story of losing a friend she's moving away, and this is your very best friend, and you can't imagine life without them, and it's hard. And this is something that many of us can relate to, as maybe our friend moving away, or we're the ones who are moving away. And so we read the story and we talk about it, and then we'll pull out parts of the texts and look at how the writer has used language, how they've used language to convey a message, to communicate to us. So in the very first page, Meg Medina writes, Evelyn Del Rey is my mejor amiga, my numero uno, best friend. Come play, Daniela, she says, just like she always does, just like today is any other day. So we talk about, what do you think when you hear the way she's talked about her friend? What emotions are evoked for you? What do you think her intention was in explaining her friend in these very loving ways? And we have a conversation about that, and about like how it would be different if she would have just said, is my best friend, but she really like my numero uno best friend, mejor amiga. Like, that's really strong and it's intentional. And then My Papi Has a Motorcycle by Isabel Quintero, one of my very, very favorite books that makes me cry every time I read it. Isabel Quintero writes about a small moment in her life. A childhood memory of riding through town on the back of her father's motorcycle and seeing the changing city, but also reminding us of all of the history and the love that is part of the space. And we read it and we talk about it and we pull parts of the text and for instance, this gem right here, my papi has a motorcycle. From him, I've learned words like carburetor and cariños, drill and dedication. And so we talk about, what does cariños mean? And we have a conversation and we come to this conclusion, like there are some words too that you just can't translate. Like me and Sandra were talking about this before we started, like how do you even translate cariños? Like if I said love, it's still different than cariños. It still has a different connotation. And so we have these discussions about the use of language, the intentional use. This isn't random. This is very intentional, thinking about, thinking about the audience, evoking special feelings, evoking emotions, and really trying to bring you into that character and their world. And then a couple more examples, and I'm just going to talk about one so I can get to the youth writing. In the book, Yo Soy Muslim, it is a love letter to his daughter about being proud of who she is, all of her identities. And even that right there on that very first page, Yo Soy Muslim. That is, defining yourself. That's claiming who you are, reclaiming who you are, and saying, this is who I am. I am all of these things. Yo soy, yo soy. And that yo soy Muslim is a repeated line throughout the text. And there's also some Spanish that's woven in there too. And we pulled out this part and we talked about, mi mamá creates life. Mi abuelo worked the fields. My ancestors did amazing things and so will I. And so we talk about, the ways that she didn't say my mother or my mom or my mommy or my grandma. She used these words and we talked about, it probably has a special feeling, like maybe only we call our parents or our loved ones these certain cariños. And so we talked about that intentional use too, to think about special people in our lives. And so I love this book, and I just love how it also shows language to me as resistance, as, as reclaiming, as claiming, and as disrupting what people are saying about me, those single stories that swirl around about us. And so I'm going to move into my work with Somos Escritoras. I have a program that I created that stems from my dissertation called Somos Escritoras, We Are Writers. And it's a creative space that invites Latina girls in 6th through 8th grade to share their stories using writing, art, and theater as tools of self-examination and self-expression. And in this space, we draw upon a translingual approach to our writing, to our storytelling, and to our performing of our stories. And we read different texts, and when I say read, we also look at a lot of digital texts, a lot of spoken word poets. And so the poets here on the screen, Melissa Lozada Oliva, Denise Froman, Mercedes Holtry, and Ana Cristina Chapa, we watch their poetry, and we talk about the themes that they discuss, how they write from their lived experiences as Latinas, as Chicanas, as Puerto Rican women. And we talk about their intentional use of language, the way they weave in and out of English and Spanish, and the purpose, their intent, what they want to teach us also, what they want to say and declare. And this all stems from our discussions about Gloria Anzaldúa and her work around identity and culture and language. And then the girls take our discussions and take all of this and they take it to writing. And we write name stories and family stories. And here's an example from one of our writers from a few summers ago. And she is sharing her name story. And she wrote, "It took my parents the whole pregnancy to figure out my name. Jessica significa el nombre de Dios en la Biblia. Michelle means daughter of God in Hebrew. Mi nombre queda perfectamente con mi apellido. The funny thing is, I am a Buddhist and I don't believe in God." So in this writing, in this narrative that Jessica wrote, she describes her name story. And you'll see the way that she has weaved Spanish throughout this text. And in talking to her about this, she described that she could hear her mother and father telling her this story. And so that is why certain parts are in Spanish and certain parts are in English. And also throughout this, there's some tensions there with her name and what it means to her parents, and also what it means to her. And so I wanted to show this example of the ways that her intention and the ways that she's also pushing back on society and how they view her and how she feels like her name, how she is viewed because of her name. And then another example is from just last summer, another young writer who had just arrived from Mexico. We read Where I'm From by George L. Lyon and De Donde Yo Soy by Levi Romero, who is a poet from New Mexico. And both of these pieces, the poets, they describe where they're from beyond expanding that idea of location, of people, places, moments, memories, sights, sounds, smells. So much encompasses who we are and where we come from. And after reading Levi Romero's piece that he writes in English and Spanish, she wrote her own piece right here. And she wrote, I am from La Ciudad de Mexico, but yo nací in the United States, in Phoenix, Arizona. And I am in Mexico, and I live in Mexico con mi family. And in Mexico, we eat enchiladas, tacos dorados, mole rojo con pollo y arroz enfrijolado, tamales, etc. And my hermana and I moved here. Nosotras hablamos a little of English and we speak Spanish. We are so happy to be here, and I like to play football, soccer, hacer arte, read, watch movies, etc. So in this piece, we can see the ways that she has drawn upon both writers and really used Levi Romero's as an important mentor text that gave her permission in a way to write her story, and the use of Spanish throughout shows her pride of being raised between two cultures and embracing this new place where she is now residing, and that she is living with her family. And so I wanted to share these examples to show the ways that these discussions, the selection of mentor text, also opens this space in very beautiful ways and important ways for our writers to see the power of their words, to see the power of their stories, and also to see the power of their language and the many gifts that are part of their language and that are their stories. And for many of the girls that I've talked to in Somos Ritos, they don't have access to bilingual education, or they haven't had the opportunity to take classes where they continue to learn English and Spanish side by side. And so this also has given them permission and the invitation that this is not wrong, this is okay, this is who you are, and this is how we write and how we communicate. And so I'm going to turn it over to Sandra now, who's going to share a little bit about her work with her students and her pre-service teachers.
Thank you. So I spent my over 10 years of classroom teaching mostly in first and second grade bilingual classrooms. And so this is an example from my last year as a teacher in a first grade dual language classroom. Dual language meaning that the classroom had native Spanish speaker and non-native Spanish speakers in the classroom. And so I use this mentor text, Dear Primo, A Letter to My Cousin by Duncan Tonatu, when we were going to do pen paling. We were going to do pen paling with another classroom from another school. So I decided to use this book because this book is about two cousins, Carlos and Charlie, who are pen paling back and forth. One of them lives in Mexico. One of them lives, you would assume, United States, someplace urban. And so they're talking back and forth to each other. And so here we see an example of one of the pages, and it says, at recess time, I play football. My friend passes me the ball. I kick it with my foot. And if I score, I yell goal. And so there we see in the example of the text, it's using multiple languages. It's showing the translanguaging, full linguistic repertoire. Using this in the classroom as a model opens up a space for my students then in discussion to also do the same thing. And then possibly also do it in their writing with their pen pal letters. And so it's so important to bring these kinds of texts into the classroom space that doesn't demonstrate it as being a negative of, what some people previously might call mixing languages. It's not seen as a bad thing. It's seen as natural. That is how multilingual children and people speak. And so it's so important. Now, while I enjoy Dr. Tonatu's books and I love them and the artistry is amazing, it's also important to not just use this one book or not allow this book to tell a single story. So for example, this book positions one child as doing this and the other child is doing that. And so you see on the left-hand side, the children from Mexico like soccer, and the children from the United States should like basketball. So it's important to start and engage in a conversation with your students about, is that true for you? Or is it something different? Like, this might be true for Charlie and Carlitos, but how about for yourself? So it's important to also, when you're using text, you don't have to discard it just because there's something you don't agree with it in the book. Just bring it to the forefront in the conversations with your students.
No, that's so important as we were thinking about vetting and the books that we select, and how this is also a teaching moment.
Exactly. So another book I've used in the classroom, I used Last Stop on Market Street by Matt de la Peña as part of a community unit in my first grade classroom. And so at the time when I used it, it was only available in English. Luckily, there's now awesomely a Spanish version that's available. But so we were talking about this final illustration in which Shide and his grandmother are giving out food. And so my students and I discussed the importance of helping each other out. You know, how do we help each other in the community? What do we do when our families are struggling? And so during that time, I had a student, Valentina, that shares, well, actually, I don't have a home. Apenas nos mudamos. And so I knew that Valentina had moved from one major city to our small town. But what I didn't know was that she actually was living with a family friend. So she did not have her own space with her mother and her brother. And so we see she used her full linguistic repertoire. But if I would have said to her as a classroom teacher, oh, we're in English time right now, Valentina. If you don't say in English, you cannot participate. I would have shut her down immediately. And I also wouldn't have recognized and gotten important information that I then took and was able to connect her with various resources, recognizing that, you know, she needed, possibly her family needed more support. So it's so important. It doesn't matter what text you use. You know, the text is fully in English, but we can see you can also welcome in a student's full linguistic repertoire because that's coming from them. That is their true sense, their true being. So it's so important to open up those spaces in the classroom.
I'm glad you made us aware of, like, brought that to our attention, because that's so important too. Because like you said, the text might be only in English, but she responded in the way that she wanted to communicate her thought, her truth to you.
Exactly. And so in my second grade classroom, I did literature discussions, which are just discussions in small groups. What I would do is I would pick about 4 to 5 book titles around a central theme, such as, for example, family, language, and I would always make sure to give student choice. And so I never wanted to take a book and be like, this book is for you, because I can't make assumptions about how a student self-identifies. It's important to offer them multiple choices and then let them choose what connection they feel. And so in this text, it's a story about the Niña Super Cilantro is crossing the border to Mexico to save the mother that's been deported for being undocumented. And so, of course, since she's crossing a border, my students and I have this conversation of what it means to have a border. Should we have a border? Why should we, or why shouldn't we? And so a student has just said that he doesn't think there should be borders. So I ask, entonces usted dice que no debe haber fronteras. ¿Por qué? So you say there shouldn't be borders. Why? So Carlos says, para que todos puedan estar free. So that everyone can be free. So we see the use of the English word free for freedom, you know, to really reiterate that's his idea. He really wants everyone to be free. So I say, as maestra, I say, free? Okay. ¿Por qué crees que esto es importante? So why do you think this is important? So Carlos says, para que no tenga que esconderme aquí. So I don't have to hide here. And then Liliana responds, yo digo que sí, que no. No porque hay muchos malos a veces, y sí porque la gente que necesita visitar a su familia. So we see Carlos and Liliana have very different experiences. Carlos is a child born in the US of undocumented parents. So he has not been able to visit his extended family in Mexico. And so he feels like that longing, that sadness, he sees it in his parents. While Liliana, on the other hand, also born in the United States, but with parents that have a green card. And at the moment during this time, were going through the process of becoming US citizens. So every Christmas were going down to see family. They were coming back and forth. And so we see very different perspectives on what it means to have a border.
And I think that that is so important to think about when we're having these conversations, where our students are coming from, and really drawing that conversation out to understand that perspective and to help the entire community build upon one each other's experiences.
Definitely. Opening up that space for that conversation to take place. Right. And so what I did with those conversations from my classroom is I used some of those books as well as those conversations with my pre-service teachers. And so I would allow them also to have choice. I'd give them options, have choice, what books they wanted to read, what books they wanted to discuss in small groups. But then an added layer is that I would, after their discussion, I would share with them excerpts of children's discussion around that same book. Because of course, they're going to have very different experiences. And so in conversation with my pre-service teachers, we really had conversations about, well, how can we push this further? What can we do? And so it was decided, let's do children's books. And so they were to write their own children's book. It could be about any topic, whatever language they want. They just had to choose a book that they were actually going to present and share with their clinical students. And so here we have an example. And this one is I Am Ma. And so it was written by two Latina pre-service bilingual teachers. They're training to be Spanish bilingual teachers. And so they decided to write the story because they felt they had common interests and shared memories of their mom always doing their hair, and how sometimes it hurt them. She pulled their hair, so they decided to write a story about it. So we see here, I Am Ma. It hurts when you pull it like that. So, and she says, look, Lucia, si te quedas en paz, no te va a doler, dijo Ma. So if you sit still, it's not going to hurt you.
I think I've heard that a lot growing up, because it's like pulling so hard to get it all tight.
Yes. And so here we see later on in the story, the mom, no worries, the mom says, gets fed up of the complaint and says, you know what, hazlo tú, dijo Ma. So she said, you do it. And so Lucia's like, so that's exactly what I was going to do. And I really like this part because I see it as pushing against this monolingual narrative. So many times in children's books, we see the parents being monolingual in the native language of Spanish, right? That they can't speak English well, that the child has to translate for them. And here we see the mom is just flowing in and out, using her full linguistic repertoire to talk to her daughter. So I really love that.
I do too. I love that story. I want to read that. We need that in all of our classrooms. Such a shared experience.
Definitely. And so here we see another example from one of my pre-service teachers. And so she wrote in the form of a poem, Una carta a mis padres, a letter to my parents. And so this is just a couple of pages from it. And so here we see, inmigraron sin nada y crearon un hogar con love and care. Dieron su vida por sus hijos. So you immigrated without anything and you created a home with love and care. You gave your life for your children. And so we see the use of their language, right? What decisions they made, why they make those decisions, but really allowing the pre-service student to express themselves in whichever way they felt was appropriate for them.
And I see that reclaiming and that claiming of self and family.
Definitely. And so here we see a couple other pages from the book. And so in these pages it says, renacieron en los Estados Unidos, pero mantuvieron nuestra sangre mexicana y pride por ser mexicanos. We were reborn in the United States, but you maintained your Mexican blood and pride for being Mexican. So I really like this page because it's so important for our students to continue to have that cultural linguistic pride in their language. It shouldn't be seen as a problem. It shouldn't be seen as a negative. And so I love that she included that in her story of like having that pride and her parents supporting her and having that pride in the language and the culture. And then how she ended the book was just amazing. She writes, ¿Qué escribirás tú en tu carta? What will you write in your letter? So then encouraging the reader to then take the next step and write a letter to their own parents. And so this text could really be used as a mentor text for students to then write their own stories and their own letter to their parents, and what do they want to say to their parents.
I love these stories, and I just love how relatable they are, but also how important they are and how they drew upon their personal experiences to think about writing this for another reader or even writing this for their family. And I also, it shows those small stories that are so big, so important in our lives as well. And this is beautiful. This is so beautiful. I wonder what her parents said if she showed this to her parents, because this is just incredible. What a tribute.
Yes. And so this would be a great time for you to pause the video to reflect on all the various things Tracy and I have shared with you today. And we just want you to take a moment to reflect, what's one aspect that you would implement in your own classroom practice based on what we shared today? Just one thing. What is one takeaway that you have?
And Sandra, I wanted to ask you, we shared a lot today, and there's so much, we could have just gone on and on and on. But what advice do you have for a teacher who wants to start taking this up in their classroom? What advice do you have as someone who might be just getting their feet wet?
I definitely think starting with getting to know your students, right? So taking that position of a learner. As teacher, we're so used to being the ones that giving the instruction, but really position yourself as a learner. So what can you learn from your students? What can you learn from the families? Really get to know them. A lot of times I have people at different presentations like, oh, can I have your book list? What books did you use? And I'm happy to share it. But in reality, I always tell them, I'm like, just because it worked in my classroom with my population of students does not mean it's going to work with yours. You have to give them options. You have to really get to know them. I can give a really quick example. I picked a book, Esperando mi papá by René Colatola Inés, and it's about a book about a father being separated from his child, because I had two students in my class that were separated, one because of deportation and another parents had broken up. And I picked it for them, I picked it as an option for them. Well, one of them picked it, the other one didn't, because they connected with another book. They wanted to explore another aspect of their identity. So we can't just make assumptions that every book is going to fit just because it's a Latinx book. Yes. It's going to fit with all Latinx students. What thoughts do you have?
No, that's really important about knowing our students and understanding who they are and where they come from, so that we, like I mentioned earlier, don't make those cause an unintentional harm or recreate racist stereotypes. Something that I mentioned earlier, but I always think about and I share with my pre-service teachers is that we're not alone in this work. This is a community. This is a communal effort. This is us coming together in the service of our students and their communities. And so if you don't share the same linguistic background as your students, that doesn't matter. You have a community around you that can support you in this work. If you're unsure about text, reach out to someone. If you're unsure about, how to say something, ask your students. They're not going to judge you. They're not going to, not think you're intelligent. They are going to be grateful that you are trying and that you are a learner alongside of them. And I just really want to encourage you to take these steps and to know that you're not alone. You have people at your school, you have people in the office, the library, the lunch lady. You have a lot of resources around you. So don't feel overwhelmed by I have to do all these things. Start with what you can and also look to your community for support. Ask other teachers what they're doing so that maybe you can work together. And also look beyond your school, because there's networks of support that you can find at professional development conferences, through different places on Twitter. I've connected with a lot of people on Twitter. So I never want you to think that you're alone in this work. And I also, I meant to mention this earlier too, is that Sandra works a lot with bilingual teachers. A lot of my teachers, majority are monolingual English speaking, or they share my similar language story. When I say that, they've had similar language loss. They're reclaiming, they're working through this pain and trauma. And so together we think about ways that our teaching can then interrupt that and also heal that. And so I wanted to let you know you're not alone and you have people around you supporting you. And these are the conversations I also have with my pre-service teachers, that this is an urgency though too. This is an urgency to do this work and to push back on these monolingual, monocultural policies and mandates that have been around since we were in school and even before.
And Tracy made such an important point that this is not just Latinx teachers that could do this work. This is not just bilingual teachers that could do this work. Every teacher can create a space in which all students their linguistic repertoire, their cultural aspects, everything, they can bring into the classroom. It doesn't matter, what their background is or anything. They can really create that space.
And we are all learners. Like, I am learning so much every single day about my history, my culture, my students' histories and cultures, so that I can educate myself, so that I can be that teacher for them.
Exactly.
And so we invite you to keep in touch with us. We thank you for being here on a Saturday. And we want to also let you all know, teachers, librarians, custodians, secretaries, principals, vice principals, district administrators, we see you. We see you working hard to make things happen right now, in a very hard time. And we see you, and we want to just let you know that we honor you and we celebrate you, and we're in this with you as well. So we thank you for being here on a Saturday to talk about these things. And also we invite you to keep in touch with us. There's my information, there's Sandra's information. Reach out to us if you have questions. We can't wait to hear about the great things you're going to do. I love hearing from people about things that they're trying, questions that they're having, because I'm committed to this work, and I'm committed to you and your success, as Sandra is as well. And we can't wait to hear the ways that you are taking this up so that your students can fly. Have a really good day.